Oh. Well. It's very charming. I imagine a very
cheeky
small
little
frog.
chappies. Small frog.
Yeah, sort of. Small to it could be medium, but I'm picturing small. I'm picturing like a few millimeter, like sort of half a centimeter, a centimeter, sort of small. Like tiny little guy.
Tiny. Okay. Well, they're not that tiny. I think they're described as medium-sized. I don't know how big they are exactly, but they're sort of medium-sized. I mean, this is a species which is capable of laying 13,000 eggs.
Yes, but that wouldn't be very impressive if the eggs were equally as tiny, right? Relative sized.
No.
Spiders lay a lot of eggs, and you can get quite little spiders.
You make a good point. Yeah, they could be tiny little joke eggs. Well, how about as a clue? Let's have it once more. As a clue, it overlaps with the species or the animals we're talking about later.
Right. So I'm assuming you're not meaning Australia, but instead meaning that it's from like the Balkans.
Yes. Southeast
I think
Europe.
I would call this. It's not something like European pond frog, is it?
You're pretty close, mate. You're pretty close. That's a good guess. Not sure exactly what European pond frog is, but this is a marsh frog. Pelophylax.
I think I might be thinking of pool frog as opposed to pond frog, actually.
Pool frog is a really good guess, mate. That was really close.
Pool frog is what I was thinking of. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not pond
that's okay.
frog.
Pools, ponds, they're much of a muchness. But no, this is the marsh frog, Pelophylax robundus. So this is a really widespread
What is
frog.
a marsh if not a big plant-filled pool?
It's hard to argue with that logic, to be fair. When does a marsh become a pool? When does a pool become a pond? When does a pond become a marsh again? It really is a circular continuum of swampiness, and frogs love it. So this species, the marsh frog, found all over mainland Europe, east to Turkey, massive range. It's a big green frog. They're not native to the UK. I said big green frog. It's like a medium-sized green frog. I actually, to my shame, I can't see how big it is on the Amphibia website here, but I always thought of them as being quite big. Slightly unclear.
Are you sure you just weren't really close to them?
Well, I think I have seen one. I think I've seen them in France. They are, they're quite big. I reckon they're a similar size to our common frogs. They're like a good sort of...
Yeah, that's a proper frog size.
A big one could be a hand size. And they're often very, very green. They just look like generically froggy, like pointy face. Bit of pattern and greenness going on, which is quite cool. But yeah, they're basically... they're not native to the UK, but there are a small number in Kent. So a small number were released at a site in Kent in the 1930s, and they were able to survive in the wild. And over the next few decades, they've spread into surrounding wetlands, and now they can be found throughout the southeast of England as an introduced species. They are a highly opportunistic amphibian. That's how they're described, which is a little bit unkind to describe an amphibian as opportunistic. No, I think it's fair.
Is that a negative trait? Opportunism?
I feel like it's got a negative connotation for humans.
Opportunistic?
Makes you sound like a sort of bit of a creep if you're opportunistic, I always think, but maybe not. Maybe it's like
maybe
opportunistic.
You're just quick on your feet, cunning like a fox.
Yeah. What would opportunism be in humans then? Just like eating other people's leftover food and stuff. I don't know.
I mean that's just recycling. That's just smart.
That is good. I mean, you can't really argue with that, to be fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, so an opportunistic amphibian, this one, lives in mixed deciduous forests, also lives on steppes, forest steppes, that like, everyone knows steppes from Zoo Tycoon. It's that like rocky, snowy environment. Yeah. Semi-desert and deserts as well. They'll make a home in, so they're pretty chill. They're semi-aquatic. They like water. It doesn't really matter. It can be flowing. It can be stagnant. It can be a shallow puddle. It can be a pond. It can be a lake. It can be a river. Marsh frogs don't mind. They just like it wet. And they're tolerant of high salinity as well. So they can even take it salty. So a little bit of a survivor, really, this marsh frog.
See, now suddenly opportunistic becomes survivor, and survivor's a positive trait, right?
Survivor is a positive trait. You're quite right. Yeah. But there we go.
They've got
marsh
a wonderful
frog, Pelophylax robundus. It's a great call. It's still
like
3-2 to me. It is. It's like... But it's still 3-2 to me, Ben. So still winning the game, which obviously takes the bank. But let's move on, shall we? We've got some Patreon requested episodes this time.
What episode are we?
212. No, 213. 213. Episode 213. And we've got some Patreon selected papers here. So this first one was requested by our patron Jafe. So shouts to Jafe. Jafe had a very specific request. I wonder if Jafe had this particular paper in mind, because this request was very specific.
It's a wonderful coincidence.
Yeah, so Jafe wanted a paper about how to sex blue-tongued skinks, Tiliqua scincoides, and yeah, these things apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently they're notoriously difficult to sex, blue-tongued skinks. Obviously, determining the sex of animals is important for ecologists, people recording the species in the wild. It's useful to know whether you're finding males or females. It's good for like population estimates, all that kind of stuff. But also people who breed skinks in captivity will be very interested to find out how to determine the sex, because it works better if you have two of opposing sexes. So here we have a paper dedicated to not one, but two ways to work out whether you have a boy skink or a girl skink. This is by McKenzie and Doneley, 2022, entitled A Comparison of Two Techniques to Identify the Sex of the Eastern Blue-tongued Skink, published in the Australian Veterinary Journal. So it's seldom we actually deal with veterinary research, but we have an opportunity to have a look at some veterinary research here. Got to say, Australian Veterinary Journal, nice formatting, some orange highlighting, my favourite colour.
It's kind of fun, isn't it? It's a bit more different. It's not one of the big publishing houses, same old, which is nice.
I feel like vets know how to have a good time. And yeah, so the authors of this paper got hold of 20 skinks, which were mostly of known sex, because the people who owned the skinks, these were captive animals, had bred them previously. So they kind of already knew which sex they were.
That's going to sort of prove it.
Yeah, the skinks had already proven it themselves. Proven breeders, and the plan was to use these skinks to see if two different methods worked. Two different methods to sex these skinks. And the age-old technique is through examining the skink and taking some measurements. So there are relationships between certain measurements on the lizards. Essentially, males have bulkier heads than females generally. So you can work out the sex of the skink.
Yes.
Historically, this is how people have done it.
So they're comparing head dimensions to other dimensions, right? It's a ratio thing as opposed to an absolute size thing. Correct. You can have bigger skinks and smaller skinks, but it's the ratio that you care about. The head to, what was it? Head to SVL, which is nose to vent, snout to vent, and head in relation to trunk length, right? Which is from the middle of the forelimbs to the middle of the hind limb, so it's sort of like shoulder to hip in a way, if you were doing it on humans.
Yeah, so they're comparing the width of the head to the length of the body without the tail, and the width of the head to the length of their trunk. Yeah, we have a trunk too. Not to be confused with an elephant's trunk. And then, they calculated the ratios for each skink, and they were categorized into male or female. Basically, Phillips et al., this old paper, decided that there were like male versions of these like ratios and female ones, and they categorized all of their skinks into those sort of bins based on this old paper by Phillips et al. And as it turned out, this method was not the most accurate. I think it was like 35% definitely accurate, but then when they forced them into bins, even if they were kind of on the cusp, it became 70% accurate. So if you go by morphology alone, you can get the sex of your skinks right about 70% of the time.
I don't think that's telling the whole story. I don't think the way they've summarized it is necessarily the best way of doing it, because it has a tendency to detect females when they were male, but it never said a male was female.
Right. So the females with the widest heads get mistaken as males.
Sex is male. Yeah, males were misidentified as females. Yeah, but females were never misidentified as males.
Oh, I see. Other way around then. So basically,
I think I said it backwards the first time.
Yeah.
So the summary of like 70 correct, that's fine. But I do think that there's a sort of interesting sort of edge here of taking into like 70% might be perfectly fine if you only care about avoiding sort of false positives one way or false negatives the other way, right? It's if you only care about IDing females and you've got a method which is sort of overly sensitive to IDing females, then that might be perfectly fine, right? Because you might, if a male gets sort of mixed up in there, no big deal. But if your separation absolutely cannot make a mistake regarding sort of male attribution, then okay, that 70% is going to be really problematic.
Right.
So there's a question of like sensitivity versus specificity, and I think the 70% just sort of glosses over the fact that the errors are only one way.
Right. So the males that don't have very wide heads kind of get misallocated as females.
The males that don't have very wide heads get misallocated. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
I think.
And so as I mentioned, we got this traditional morphological approach, which isn't, it's not bad. Like you can get most of it. It
airs on the side of female.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned, there was two methods they used here. So there's the other newfangled approach, and this is to use contrast radiography. And this is where they squirt some special goo inside the lizard's vent, which fills up the pocket where the genitals are and shows up on an X-ray. And so, yeah, essentially they put some goo in the vent, which fills up this little genital area. And the genital area is different for males and females. The males have like hemipenes, which are kind of all like coiled up in there. And the females just have hemiclitors, which are like these like quite straight structures. They look very different on the X-rays. And yeah, the contrast radiography method, using this X-ray combined with the special goo, was 100% accurate in determining the sex of the skinks. It was always the same as what they were known to be. I checked, right? Because you think, okay, well, having a handheld, X-ray machine doesn't seem very practical, but you can actually buy a handheld X-ray unit, Ben. They are £1,000, Great British pounds. And you could actually take that into the field with you and shoot X-rays into lizards on the fly. You would, however, have to take the special goo with you in order to squirt that into the vents. But it's possible. And this handheld X-ray,
and they were anesthetized. They were anesthetized, right? Sedated.
Right. Okay. Well, that seems fair. Yeah.
So there is an additional like welfare risk here of sedating your animals to do this.
Yeah. And presumably, yeah, because I was thinking like in putting goo into them does seem like quite a big intervention, like if you're sexing animals in the field as an ecologist, you kind of want things to be quick and easy. Like it's annoying enough to have to probe a snake.
Right.
Yeah, so having to put goo and then, hit it with an X-ray gun. Obviously, X-ray guns carry their own dangers. That is some pretty serious radiation. You don't want to be shooting it at your own genitals, which ironically is what you're doing to the skink. But
the skinks, yeah. So there are welfare costs here that are sort of adding up.
But those little handheld X-ray guns, mate, they are cool. They look like it's like a modern Polaroid camera combined with a gun, right? So it looks like a Polaroid camera on like a gun.
You're only going to be X-raying these animals like once or twice, a few times if they're unlucky and they get recaptured.
Yes.
Can't imagine they're outrageously problematic.
No. But essentially, if you have got your own skinks and you want to work out whether they're male or female, the best thing you can do is measure the width of the head and compare it to the trunk, look up this little board of what's what, and just hope that your male skinks aren't particularly sort of feminine in appearance, and then you can be relatively sure.
But probably look up this paper for reference, as opposed to the Phillips one, because they do make adjustments to where that threshold is. I think they also missed a trick by not doing this as a sort of doing the stats in a sort of Bayesian way, where you get your skink has a X probability of being male and an X probability of being female, which I think is the way you'd want to do it. And then
it would be nice to have some figures
like a little plug-in. You sort of put in your head to trunk ratio and your head to SVL ratio, and it could pop out a probability based on those of being a male or female skink.
Sounds like a little bit of homework for you there, Ben. All right, so
if there's a demand for it, it wouldn't take all that long to sort out.
I could imagine making like little plug and play type of thing with that. I mean, relatively simple formula, and then that'd be cool though.
And
that'd be
what's
fun
nice is
online.
if you had more confirmed like individuals over time, you could refine those distributions to refine the probabilities over time. So if you just had more data, you could just throw it in and keep refining it.
I like it. Let's get technical. So there we go, Jafe. Hopefully that scratches the itch of how you can sex blue tongue skinks. It isn't easy, basically, mate. Is the sort of take home message. Without
another thing, sorry. Yes, on the not easy aspect, measurement error is a concern, because you're dealing with such sort of you're sort of processing these measurements and turning them into ratios, and dealing with a threshold. If you've just got this binary like yes, no, male, female, a little bit of measurement error could have sort of bigger repercussions down the line as that data is processed and sort of checked. So that's something to consider as well, as how well people can measure SVL and trunk length and head width on these animals. Head width can be a bit of a funny one.
Yeah, because you got to get the widest
bit.
Get
the sight angle slightly off, and it's gonna exaggerate that width.
Yeah, but there we go. Blue tongue skinks, difficult to sex, getting less difficult with time, but also the methods are a bit complicated. So,
and you can apparently get an X-ray machine for £1,000.
You can, and you can shoot it at your pals, and that'll be frowned upon because it's quite dangerous to do that. So let's move on. We got another patron request. So this one was from Ethan. Ethan said, heading out to do some field work on montane rattlesnakes in Mexico, New Mexico, and it has me thinking a lot about the dispersal barriers that resulted in all the cool species and subspecies of rattlesnakes in that region. So Crotalus lepidus, willardi, pricei, etc. So Ethan said, I'd enjoy an episode about their movement ecology if there's enough literature to dig into. Unfortunately, Ethan, there was like next to nothing on those cool little rattlesnakes. So we decided to take your second option, which was, and Ethan said, I'd enjoy an episode, or maybe something on the demographics or movement of any of the stygobiotic salamanders. Had a chance to see Gyrinophilus paleucus recently and would love to know more about any species like them. So, stygobiotic means living exclusively in groundwater, such as aquifers or caves. And
see, that's a new word right there.
Yeah, definitely a new word for me. I'd never.
Where's our new word jingle?
Stygobiotic. Yeah, we don't have a new word jingle, do we? We should get one.
Need one of the dictionary sound effects from those old Casio keyboards.
I don't remember that, but I'd be interested to hear it. I could definitely. That sounds like it could have legs. But yeah, so stygobiotic means living exclusively in groundwater. That's like aquifers, caves, underwater, water. And Gyrinophilus paleucus, which Ethan mentioned, is the Tennessee cave salamander, which is this salamander obviously found in America, which has a restricted range of limestone cave systems in Tennessee, USA. It's pink, that salamander, and it doesn't metamorphose into its adult form, so it always stays larval. It has the pink feathery gills. It looks quite similar to the olm, which is the European sort of equivalent that we are going to be just talking about
Proteus.
Here. And a subject of the paper we did find. So we're going to be talking about olms, Ben. Down in their caves. And this is a paper by Recknagel, Zakšek, Delić, and Gorički and Trontelj, published in 2024. Multiple transitions between realms shape relict lineages of Proteus cave salamanders, published in Molecular Ecology. So yeah, olms.
Mysterious looking creatures.
They are very, very strange.
Thought to be the offspring of dragons.
They were, weren't they? They were thought to be baby dragons, and then when there would be a big flood, because they live in caves, all the olms would come flooding out, and everyone would be like, "Oh, the dragon's nest."
Poor little guys.
The dragon's nest's been damaged. But really, it was just some weird subterranean little creatures that had been flooded out of their caves. So the kind of pretext for this study is that there is lots of biodiversity hidden in caves in the world where humans seldom go. We don't really go caves very often. I don't know about you, but the idea of, I mean, I'd go into like a nice big cave to look for salamanders, but when you see videos of people caving, squeezing through little gaps, oh mate, that really...
Absolutely not. No chance.
Something rises in me. It's like a little bit of panic just to see someone doing it, let alone you would not catch me wedging myself in any holes, going down into caves. And because humans have this kind of, you know, healthy respect or fear of caves, there are still probably lots of species waiting to be described in caves by scientists. And in the Dinaric Alps, or the Dinarides, there's a mountain range in southern and south central Europe, the Dinaric Alps, and it has this caste system. And we're talking about like Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And they have this underwater caste system. So it's like limestone rock creating this sort of beautiful array of underground cave networks which hold water. And down in there has evolved a very unusual creature called the olm. And this paper is basically about whether or not these olms should be considered multiple species.
Was that they're sort of relatively isolated from each other, right? It's not like a monstrous cave network spreading across these countries, all interconnected necessarily. They sort of are separate cave networks, and with sort of mountainous areas in between, and so there's a lot of biogeographical factors that could lead these groups to be sort of independent just through isolation, right? So it's kind of prime to investigate and see what's going on genetically between these different cave systems and these different olms. And there's also a weird olm, which is a different colour from the others.
The black
and has
olm.
eyes, maybe.
Yeah, the black one. There's a black one. Yeah. They're all white except for this one black one,
yes.
Which is a bit of a random outlier.
Which is meant to be, basically it's got characteristics that you would associate with more terrestrial dwelling species, right? It's less... Yeah. The regular olm, or the sort of more widespread, frequently seen morphotype, is super pale and no eyes.
Yeah.
And then there's this darker morph with eyes.
Yeah. Do they have completely no eyes, or do they just have really, really, really small, pathetic eyes that don't do anything?
I was just operating as if they don't have any eyes, because they always talk... Well, they don't have eyesight, right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they do look completely eyeless in the picture. Oh no, they do. They have like one little tiny dot.
Little sort of...
It's like almost like a little recess where there would be an eye. But no, they look pretty much...
they're describing the black olm as having eyes, so I would infer the others not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The white olms are certainly blind.
Yeah, and they don't need sight because they live in dark caves where there is no light. Yeah. Light doesn't penetrate, so yeah, over time they've lost their eyes, and they kind of develop this cave phenotype. And you know, these are salamanders, and they're similar to the ones in North America that I mentioned earlier, but they've evolved kind of independently in Europe and North America. And this olm, Proteus anguinus, is the one we're talking about, which is probably the most iconic one. It's also the largest obligate cave tetrapod, apparently, so 40 centimeters long, lives in caves, biggest one.
The other thing that they mentioned in the paper that I wasn't aware of is the sort of white phenotype of the olm. It looks like it's an albino, right? It looks like it's got no melanin to it, with the sort of pink gills and everything. It looks just sort of unpigmented, but that's not the case. They can produce melanin in their liver, but it's just not used sort of externally. So it's not... They look like an albino sort of creature, but they're not, which I hadn't even sort of considered. I just sort of thought, all right, yep, they're melanin producing. They don't need it down in the caves there, and that's that.
Yeah, but they do. They do have hidden melanin inside the liver, which is pretty nuts. And so Proteus anguinus means snake-like because they look a bit snaky. And apparently Darwin was onto these guys because Darwin mentioned them in The Origin of Species when he discussed the evolution of character loss. So obviously these things have lost their eyes.
Yes, the idea that it's redundant, there's no point upkeeping it, sort of thing, and so it sort of, disappears, becomes what's the word for traits for features that are there but they're not being used, like the spurs on a python?
Vestigial.
There you go, residual.
Vestigial.
Vestigial.
Yeah.
Vestigial.
Yeah. And so they had, like you say, they had quite an in-depth look at the genetics of the kind of olms all over these Balkan cave systems. And they discovered that there were 9 lineages which are highly genetically differentiated from each other. So you've got these 9 kind of groups that are all different, and within those 9 groups they're all kind of similar. So you've got kind of 9 closely similar groups that are all different from each other, which is kind of a precursor to describing species, really. And
well, there was a couple of hints that a couple of these lineages are in reasonably close proximity to each other, but there's no evidence of sort of interbreeding necessarily. So there might actually be reproductive isolation between these lineages. It would be another sort of check mark against the yes, they're species sort of column.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a few, like you say, that are actually found in similar same caves but don't breed together anymore. So that was one interesting thing. So they've obviously been separate, probably come back together, or maybe they speciated there and then. But they are different. And these cave systems only came about around 20 million years ago. And so this paper suggests that these olms began diversifying around 18 million years ago. So they found themselves in the caves, started diversifying, and there are other cave-dwelling species like beetles and clams and shrimps that have all kind of diversified in this same Dinaric caste system within the last 20 million years. And there used to be
the back of one of these salinity crises, right?
That's right.
There was this monstrous sea. What was it called? Where Paratypheus? Potentially,
right?
How are you pronouncing that?
Big salty
Basically,
sea.
It's this big sea, or mega lake, whatever you want to call it, which was next to the Mediterranean. So you've got the Mediterranean. We've talked about in previous episodes that salinity crisis where it sort of got very low and was sort of blocked up from contact with the Atlantic and reduced dramatically down. This is basically a big sea that was Black Sea and what is now Caspian Sea and covered that whole area. And this whole salinity crisis is the reduction of that sea down, which, you can imagine any large body of water no longer existing is going to lead to some pretty sizable climatic and sort of local weather changes.
Yeah.
And, revealing a whole bunch of land that wasn't inhabitable by terrestrial species, things along those lines, salt changes, drainage basin changes, it's pretty dramatic.
Yep. And so basically the sea receding that led to sort of a freshwater lake system somehow.
I'm assuming it was salty because it's this whole salinity crisis. So as it's reducing down, it's becoming more and more saline, right? Because the water's being lost, but the salt's remaining, and that's reducing down.
Yeah, but then eventually, once the sea had retreated enough, you had these kind of like areas which were then dry, which could then host fresh water.
Well, presumably, eventually, salt gets removed somehow, and what remains is salty land.
Salty land. Essentially, there would have been at some point like a freshwater lake system and marshy extensions, which would have had like the ancestors of these species, which have then subsequently moved down into the caves as these lakes have gone away. Although the
initial divergence is just before this crisis, and then the sort of other divergences in lineages is sort of happening after.
Once they've been pushed into the caves. And
Potentially,
apparently there are no known fossils of Proteus from the surface, so we don't know what this species would have looked like, or at least its sort of potentially its evolutionary precursors may have looked like when they were on the surface, because no fossils have ever been found. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. Amphibians don't fossilize very well. They're very fleshy. They're very juicy. There's not a lot to fossilize in them. We may find some fossils, but, you know, they are less likely to fossilize than other animals.
Yes. We talked about with the WCH retrospective, there was a talk on exactly that, which I think you're alluding to, which... Exactly. You've got this real blind spot with amphibians, potentially.
Yeah. But yes, so there we go. The olms, Proteus anguinus, evolving in their little cave systems, and seemingly they've formed these 9 quite well supported lineages. So
you're wrapping up, but I've got one more point. Before you do. It's the Dollo's law aspect to this paper.
Dollo, I knew you were going to bring up old Dollo.
Well, I mean, you're basically starting on it. You're saying that you can't know what the ancestral sort of fossil olm equivalent is, but the chances are it was land. I mean, sort of, you know, terrestrial, non-cave dwelling. And so you're presented with 2 scenarios. Because the one with eyes, this sort of black olm, it could have come about that, okay, that one is the sort of ancestral state and it has never changed, and therefore all the other lineages are repeated sort of convergent evolution instances of this cave phenotype without the eyes. So that's multiple. I think it would require 5 different instances of them losing eyes and becoming these sort of little pale old, you know, the classic olm that we know. Alternatively, which is the sort of weirder option, so you've got this ancestral state that looks like a terrestrial, you know, black olm. It moved into the caves, has sort of switched to this cave phenotype that's pale and no eyes, and then there's been a reversal back to something that looks more compatible with a terrestrial lifestyle and above ground lifestyle with its eyes again.
This is the black
that
olm,
would only require 1 change or 2 changes, 1 to cave phenotype and then 1 back, but it would require a reversal, which would be counter to the whole Dollo's law thing, that you can't, there's a tendency not to reverse back complex traits, right? And eyes, pretty complex.
It's about as complex as it gets.
Plus coloration. Okay, that's even more. Like there's quite a suite of traits there that would need to be reversed. Granted, it only needs to happen once. So it's either that happens once, or we have 5 instances of convergent evolution with these olms all sort of leading to the same similar, you know, the no eye phenotype that we know.
And this is all just in the ones in the Balkans here, yeah?
Yeah, this is just these, what was it, nine clusters?
Groups. Wow, yeah, you're right, because Dollo's law, the whole law that like once you lose something complex, it doesn't really come back, makes you think that actually these things have all convergently evolved their weird underground looks.
Right, so it's a weighting thing, basically. It's a weighting problem. What's more likely, what's least likely? The reversal or 5 different instances of convergence?
I think 5 different instances of convergence, because, you know, I respect Dollo, and I think, you know, the law is as good today as it ever was. So the idea that they've gone blind and then come unblind, I mean, turning no eye into an eye just feels like such a leap. I mean, we got millions of years to play with, but still, it's just crazy.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm a little bit lost in what to feel. I think the paper sort of is suggesting the convergence is the more likely scenario, certainly judging by the title, multiple transitions between realms, right? So it's the idea of multiple shifts into caves and multiple convergencies.
Yeah. But here we have it. The old Proteus anguinus, the largest obligate cave tetrapod. That means the longest thing, the largest thing living in only caves as a tetrapod, which by the way, brings me on to some any other business, which I forgot to say in the last episode, but I mistakenly said that fish were tetrapods, which they're not. Fish are not tetrapods. So that was a stupid thing that I said.
What are they then?
What are fish? I don't know. But yeah, tetrapods is like all amphibians and mammals and reptiles, all of those things. Whereas fish, because what is it? It's a
fish is
superclass.
A nonsense term, isn't it?
It's a superclass tetrapoda. So fish, superclass. Fishes. Okay. Well, they're kind of divided into two superclasses. Superclass Agnatha, which is jawless fishes. Superclass Osteichthyes.
I don't know why you brought up fish to begin with, mate.
You're the one who just asked what fish were. Trying to help you there with some words I can't pronounce and have never read before. You turned on me. Yeah, I know, yeah. Anyway, the long and short of it is fish are not tetrapods. So, yeah.
And what they are remains a mystery to us.
Yeah. Some of this,
it's not the place for the discussion.
Yeah, taxonomy I find it gets more confusing as you go higher up. But anyway, fish are not tetrapods is the take-home message. I said
as long as you're not talking about protists, we'll be all right.
Yes. And yeah, I can't remember who said that to me now. Oh, it was Emily. So thank you, Emily, for that correction. And
fish are not tetrapods.
Fish are not tetrapods. Fish are not tetrapods. And thank you for being so gentle in your correction as well. It was kind of the way you said it was kind. So I haven't got any other business this week. Have you, Ben?
Nope. That's me.
So, yeah, if you want to get in touch with us, if you have a correction or anything like that, you can email us, herphighlights@gmail.com, or you can find us on social media. We're on TikTok and Instagram @herp_highlights, and you can find me, Tom_E_major on Instagram. Yeah, that draws to a close.
Episode?
Pardon?
So, if people wanted their own episode or to guide selection of topics,
patreon.com/herphighlights, and big shouts to Ethan and Jay. Thanks very much for your support and for picking such fascinating topics. Until next time, thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.